If you are pregnant or you've recently had a baby, this podcast is for you. I am your host, Kath Bequee, a physiotherapist working in women's health and mum of three. Inside my online program, FitNest Mama, I just love helping support women to care for their bodies during pregnancy, prepare their bodies for birth, and support their after-birth recovery, helping them feel confident and strong inside out during this important stage of their lives. In this podcast, join me each week as we dive into all things pregnancy care, childbirth, and postnatal recovery, helping you through every step of the journey. It is absolutely possible to feel amazing and confident in our bodies during this motherhood journey, and I want that for you. Come and say hi to me on Instagram at FitNestMama, and let's dive into today's episode. Hello, and welcome back to the Pregnancy, Birth and Recovery podcast. Today I have a really interesting conversation with the lovely Kristy, who is a long-term member inside FitNest. She joined us with her third pregnancy, and that was over 3 years ago, I believe. So Kristy shares her story. She's based in America, and she has been a surrogate twice. So she had 2 of her own babies, followed by 2 surrogate pregnancies. And we talk about a lot of different things. We talk about her decision to becoming a surrogate. We discuss she's very candid and open with her symptoms and her experience with prolapse and pelvic floor concerns after her third pregnancy. And she talks us through how she tackled she's a keen runner, and she talks us through how she managed her return to running plan and her return to running program with her third and fourth pregnancies too. So yeah, Kristy shares a lot of information about pregnancy, about her birth preparation, about her, as I said, return to running journey, her pelvic floor symptoms, her surrogacy journey. So I think this is a fantastic episode that I really do think you're going to love. Before I do dive straight into this episode, I want to invite you to come and join us for a free 7-day trial. If you would like to help your body recover after birth like Kristy did, and if you would like to help reclaim your pelvic floor, core and strength safely pre and postpartum, then FitNest Mama is perfect for you. Perhaps you're busy, perhaps you've lost your motivation, perhaps you're not sure how to best be looking after your body, perhaps you've got pelvic girdle pain or abdominal muscle separation, or perhaps you really want to give your pelvic floor and core a booster and help your body with its postnatal rehab journey, then join us for these convenient, short, easy workouts that you can do from the comfort of your home whilst your bubba sleeps, whilst your toddler runs around, or at the end of a long day at work. Join our 7-day free trial, fitnestmama.com, and all the links are in the show notes. All right, let's dive into this episode. Kristy, thank you so much for joining me on the Pregnancy, Birth and Recovery podcast. You're a lovely member inside FitNest Mama, and you have been through 4 pregnancies, 4 births, and you've got an amazing story to share. So thank you for volunteering, offering your story.
Yes, I'm so excited to share. I think that it's not every day that, you talk to someone who has been a surrogate. And that is a big part of my story with my 2 pregnancies, my first 2 pregnancies being my own 2 children. And then the third and fourth pregnancies that I carried were as a gestational carrier. So it's something that I love talking about.
So it is an interesting story. So we're definitely going to, have a chat about your surrogacy, also how your body, because you mentioned your third pregnancy and probably your fourth pregnancy were quite different from your first and second. And I'd love to also hear about your recovery journey too. So there's lots to it. So first question, you've got 2 babies of your own. What made you decide to to become a surrogate mother or a surrogate. Is that what's the right term to use? Surrogate.
Yes, surrogate is preferred and pretty interchangeable with gestational carrier or GC for short. I think that in general, at this point in time, a lot of people really don't like the phrase surrogate mother, just because that gives this connotation that, I am the mother in some way, where that's so not the case.
As soon as I said it, I thought that's wrong.
No, that's okay. That's okay. It still is a term that's definitely out there and that was, more traditionally used in the past, but surrogate, gestational carrier kind of interchangeably. And just to mean that the children that I carried as a surrogate were in no way genetically mine, that they were the intended parent children. So to, how I became interested in surrogacy actually goes back to before my husband and I were even thinking about having kids, before we were ready to have kids of our own. I used to coach swimming, and there was a parent of a couple of my swimmers who was a surrogate twice for the same family, and actually through the same agency, that I ended up being a surrogate with. And I had never known anyone who had done that. And I thought that it was both equally fascinating and strange and so intriguing. And I remember a conversation that I had with her, asking her, isn't this emotionally really difficult to carry a baby for an entire pregnancy and not bring that baby home? And I think that's often the very first question that so many people have. How can you carry a pregnancy for someone else and not be emotionally attached to that baby? And she said, no, it's not like that at all. I just love being pregnant. And I don't think that I thought about that conversation for many years. But after I carried my daughter, who's 7, and then my son, who's now 5, and both of those pregnancies had been very healthy. They'd been very easy. For the most part, I'd had very easy delivery experiences and healthy postpartum recoveries. And my husband and I felt that after we had our son, that our family was complete. And it was like, once we decided that, there was just this thought in the back of my mind that I could not run away from. And it was that, I've had these healthy pregnancies. I could do that again for someone else and help someone else build their family. And so I probably thought more and more seriously about it over the course of a year, and did a lot of research on it and talked with my husband about it. And eventually he came around to feeling like, okay, if this is really something that you feel passionate about doing, let's make sure it's, we're doing it in a way that you're supported. And that's the point at which I then applied to become a surrogate. So that's kind of how I, came around to that. Is I did meet someone who had done it first. And I don't know that I ever would have thought about doing it, if I had not met her.
It's amazing to hear, because here in Australia, as we were saying off air, to be a surrogate, it's got to be altruistic in terms of, I've heard of people being a surrogate for their sister who's having trouble conceiving or whatever it might be. So often you're a surrogate for someone you know. So I know it doesn't matter where you are in the world. I know there's all these different regulations and rules and all the rest. But just the concept of pregnancy is a long time. And when you put birth into the process, it's pretty mind-blowing that you would do this for someone you don't know. So I just want to I feel like congratulating you on that. That's amazing. That is a huge gift. It's very different to donating an egg, which I assume, again, I'm not an expert in the matter, but I assume is a relatively, again, not an easy process, but compared to a whole 9 months in childbirth, yeah, you know what I mean? It's Impressive.
Yeah. Oh, I appreciate that. It is, we call it a surrogacy journey that you are embarking on, that you're committing to. And I think that that's such an accurate, I think it's a great way to think about it because it really is often a long span of time with matching and going through all of these clearance processes to make sure that you are medically, emotionally, mentally, physically capable, of committing to this. And then with, the whole pregnancy, going through IVF to become pregnant and the relationship you're building with these intended parents, it's so much. And it's a huge commitment and investment of time and energy. And there's so much trust that goes
Mm,
both ways, I think, in that relationship. It is a journey that you're going on together with the intended parents. And it's a beautiful one in most cases. And my journeys were very, very rewarding. And I'm so grateful for that.
mm. Now, I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's two different ways you can be a surrogate, gestational carrier. Got to get the right terms.
Yeah.
One is using your own egg. Is that correct? And then the other way is having IVF with another person's egg. Is that correct?
Yes, so two different types of surrogacy. And so gestational surrogacy is where the embryo is not biologically related to you in any
Okay.
way. And then traditional surrogacy would be where, I was using my own egg. And I think for many reasons and for many ethical reasons, that is not done much at all anymore because as you can imagine, that emotional
Mm,
attachment piece, if this baby that you're carrying is genetically half you, that can be trickier to navigate. It can be harder emotionally. And of course, that's not an experience I have personally had. But in the US, that is not something that is seen very much anymore.
yeah, right. Makes sense. Okay, so
Yeah.
you came and joined FitNest in 2021, your third pregnancy. Why did
Yeah.
you come in your third pregnancy? I know we touched on before, but what happened that was different in your third pregnancy compared to your first two?
Yes, that's a great question. So I feel like probably similarly to many of your listeners and many other members of your community, I didn't think much about my pelvic floor until I started having some prolapse symptoms, unfortunately. And I do feel like there is such a lack of education, even just growing up and going through pregnancy. I feel like it's something that's not talked about as much as it should be. And I have always been an athlete. I've been very into running as an adult. So through my first two pregnancies with my own kids, I ran hard, I lifted, I swam, and I stayed in great shape. I had healthy deliveries. I had pretty easy recoveries where my goal was often to get back in shape, as quickly as possible. And I probably overdid it a little bit. I probably did not let my body rest enough after each of my own two deliveries with my own two kids. But I didn't have any issues. I had no prolapse symptoms, nothing at all that would have made me think, oh, with a third pregnancy, maybe I should be a little bit more careful. So going into my surrogacy journey, my third pregnancy, it was important to me that the intended parents that I was matched with would be comfortable with me continuing to exercise regularly. That included running at the time. And so I did what I had always done. I ran. I know at one point I let them know your baby and I have run over 250 miles together. And I was so proud of reaching that milestone. And that was probably somewhere early in the third trimester by that point. And it was not very long after that as I continued running, I started noticing pressure, just feeling more pressure in my pelvic floor, feeling a little bit of heaviness, although I don't know that I would have defined it like that at the time. I think I just thought, I'm getting bigger. I'm getting towards the end of this pregnancy. This is just my third pregnancy. It's just feeling a little bit tougher right now. So I did stop running at that point, but I was probably already 34, 35 weeks along. And I delivered. And after that delivery, that's when, I think I tried to go for my first run, as I had always done before, at about 4 weeks postpartum. And I knew it might take me a little bit longer to get back in shape because I had stopped running a little bit sooner in that pregnancy. But I noticed heaviness and several different symptoms. It was just really uncomfortable. It wasn't painful, but I knew something was not right. And so when I went in for my postpartum checkup at about 6 weeks postpartum, I talked to my doctor about it. She did a checkup. And I think at that point, I think she had let me know that I had a stage 2 posterior vaginal prolapse. And never having had issues at all, with pregnancy or delivery, that was really heartbreaking for me. And I remember feeling so upset and emotional about it for really two big reasons. One was that running was my passion. That was how I found myself again as a mom, as a new mom after having my own kids and having this new identity. And there was that piece of me that was fearful that I wouldn't be able to run again like I used to. So the second thing was that the intended parents that I had carried for, we had already talked about the possibility of doing a sibling journey together. And so I not only wanted to run, but I did already have it in my mind that I would love to do this one more time. I can do another pregnancy. I can get through that. And so having this prolapse felt like a barrier or a possible barrier to both of those goals that I had. So I knew that I would have to be more careful getting back into running. I would have to take it easier. I would need to do a lot of specific pelvic floor training and exercise, and I couldn't just bounce right back to where I had been. And so I did find a pelvic floor physical therapist here in the States, and she also specialized in kind of working with athletes and runners. And so that was one of my goals with working with her over the course of a few months, was to lessen those prolapse symptoms and get stronger to where I was able to start running again. And my goal was also to, at the end of our time together, to hopefully be able to be cleared by my doctor for another surrogacy journey. And so it was a lot of work. And I know that, a prolapse doesn't just go away. It's something that I know is going to be something I have to manage for the rest of my life, but it doesn't have to rule my life. And thankfully, when I did meet with my doctor again, and I think at this time I was about 7 months postpartum, my checkup showed that I was no longer at a stage 2. She determined I was at a stage 1 with my symptoms. And I know that in the grand scheme of things, that's not that bad. There are people that definitely deal with worse symptoms and more painful symptoms. And so I'm thankful that it wasn't worse than it was. But it really was surprising to me how hard it hit me emotionally. I think I had always just assumed my body is capable of whatever I want, and I think it surprised me how hard it hit me emotionally, because I had always been that kind of person to push my body to its limits. And I had never really had any complications or injuries or difficulties pushing myself in any way. And so I think it caught me off guard that all of a sudden, here's something where it's out of my control, and this is something that I'm going to have to be more careful about and more mindful about moving forward. But it was so worth it to me to try to work through those prolapse symptoms, not only to get back into running, but also to be able to carry one more pregnancy.
Yeah, amazing. Now, because I do want to get onto this fourth pregnancy, a second surrogacy journey. But first, I'd love to just ask a few quick questions. Like, I know we're going to dive a bit deeper into your fourth birth story, but from your previous births, did you mentioned you had pretty good births, pretty good recoveries. Did you have any forceps ever? Did you have a long stage of pushing? Like, how did the births transpire?
So never any forceps. And with my first delivery, they did use the vacuum assist to help get my daughter out. And I do think it's important to note that with my first and second and third deliveries, with all of them, I had episiotomies. And I know that that's supposed to be very rare. And then and probably because I had it with my first, there was probably some scar tissue there that wasn't as flexible, wasn't, allowing my son to come out, and then Babe to come out. So unfortunately, that was something that I just always had with my recoveries, was dealing with those stitches, of course, some pain there. And and I know we'll get into this too, but my fourth delivery was actually the only one where I did not have an episiotomy, thankfully.
So for those listening, an episiotomy is preferable over a third or fourth degree perineal tear. So often they do an episiotomy if they can, sometimes if they're like watching and observing, they can predict that there's a lot of stretch happening, and you actually would prefer to have an episiotomy versus a larger tear. So an episiotomy generally heals about the same as a second degree tear. So there's generally pretty good healing associated with an episiotomy. So that's good news.
Yeah.
And did you have any family history of prolapse with your mother? Any female? No. Yeah.
No, not that I'm aware of.
Yeah. And did you have a long pushing phase with your babies over 90 minutes?
No, definitely not. I think all of my pushing phases were probably 20 minutes or less, I think.
And being a runner, had you had a pelvic floor assessment prior to your first birth? Do you know if you had high tone pelvic floor?
I don't know. And no, I had never had any kind of pelvic floor assessment. Like I mentioned, it's not something that is really talked about. And I think it's kind of hard, unfortunately, too, to get referrals, for pelvic floor physical therapy and assessments there, and unless there is already an issue. I don't see a ton of preventative care with that.
That's interesting. In Australia, you don't need a referral, so you can just go and see the pelvic floor physio. Yeah, just interesting. I just wanted to ask about those risk factors that are well known. One is, just for anyone listening, out of interest's sake, one is forceps. The other one is family history, longer pushing phase, and what was the other one I mentioned? The high tone pelvic floor. So you didn't. True, hindsight's always a lovely thing. I don't want you to go down that rabbit hole, but you didn't have any glowing. Is that the right term to use? Large risk factors that we're aware of.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so your symptoms are feeling better. Sounds like you've done a lot to reinvest back into your body after the third pregnancy. You then selflessly decide to do this one more time. Talk us through your fourth pregnancy journey. Did those symptoms come on sooner?
Actually, no. Thankfully they didn't. So with my fourth pregnancy, really this was the only pregnancy that I went into feeling more prepared and ready to manage my pelvic floor symptoms. And that was a huge goal. with this most recent pregnancy was to deliver and my symptoms to not be worse than they were before. I knew that that was possible, that they could be worse or worse temporarily, but that really was my goal to, continue to do pelvic floor exercises through the pregnancy, leading up to the pregnancy, and minimize any further prolapse symptoms. So, with this fourth pregnancy, again, as a surrogate, I went through IVF, and our first embryo transfer with the intended parent's embryo was successful. And it's so different, going through IVF because everything is meticulously planned and everything is according to your hormone levels and your uterine lining, and everything has to line up perfectly for the transfer to even take place. And it's so exciting and so nerve-wracking all at the same time. But it worked. It was so exciting. And the pregnancy went very smoothly. And in surrogacy, with my experience and with my relationship with the intended parents that I cared for, we shared every milestone together. So every appointment I had, they were on a video call with me or on the phone so that they could hear updates and talk to my doctor as well. And they were able to come in person. So they live a little further away. They live in another state, but they were able to come in person for one of our bigger ultrasounds through the pregnancy, which they weren't able to do during our first journey because a lot of that journey was through the height of the COVID pandemic. And so everything was virtual there. So that was really exciting. They got to be in person at one of our ultrasounds. And the pregnancy continued well. I had a 39-week induction scheduled, but this baby was determined to come on her timeline. And so I did go into labor spontaneously. I think it was at 38 weeks and 3 or 4 days, if I remember correctly. And my intended parents rushed, across the country to get here and made it in plenty of time. But I went into the hospital and my labor progressed very rapidly, actually, with this last delivery. And my epidural didn't even work, I think partly because my labor was progressing so rapidly. So that was unfortunate. It was a little bit more painful than I had hoped, it would be.
Had you had an epidural for the previous 3 births?
Yes, I had. And with my second delivery with my son, I had the epidural so shortly before he was born that it hadn't really even kicked in all the way. So, but this most recent one, I was in a lot of pain with labor and I really wanted that epidural. And when it didn't work, that was pretty heartbreaking. But it's one of those situations where there's no looking back. You have to get through that experience. And of course, once I pushed her out, all the pain melted away. And it is an amazing experience to see, the intended parents see their baby for the first time. I can't really even describe it, how much joy I felt, similar to our first journey together. It's a combination of joy and relief and excitement. It's an amazing feeling. And so it was so beautiful to share that with them.
And if you don't mind me asking, who is in the birth room, the birthing suite with you?
So in the room was me and my husband. He was there as my primary support person. And both the intended mom and the intended dad were also in there with me. And that was the same, even with our first journey, even though it was during the pandemic, the hospital allowed for an exception for them to be in the room with us. But everybody was masked, for that first delivery together. So I still can envision the parents kind of standing to the side of the bed with their masks on, waiting for baby to be born. But with our most recent delivery here, that wasn't necessary. And there were, of course, lots of other doctors and nurses in the room too.
Now, I'd love to ask, there's two questions. Actually, I'll ask the second one first because I'm just intrigued with the whole breastfeeding side of things as a surrogate. Did you do the first feed, or like how does that work?
Yeah, so sometimes that is done. I think it's more of a personal preference. Our agency discourages that overall, and that was really not something that I felt comfortable doing. I did not feel like it was my place to nurse this child that is not mine. And I also didn't want to take away any of that bonding experience from the intended parents. So that was never really even a discussion. I knew that was not something that I was interested in doing. I don't think that was ever something that they would have been interested in doing. But we did talk about colostrum for the baby. And I actually had approval from my doctor. I think it might have been around 37 or 38 weeks gestation to start hand expressing colostrum and collecting it. And I was able to bring that to the hospital so that they could then feed baby right away. And I continued to provide that colostrum for them while we were in the hospital together.
Okay. Now, second question, which was my first, but you're a seasoned birther. Is that the right term?
Yeah, you can put it that way. Can you
please provide the listeners with some, like, how did you get through it? Your epidural didn't go as according to plan. Like, what were some tips? What were the best things to help get you through, birth?
Yeah, I want to say that my third delivery, I think that was the one that went the most according to plan for me, where of course I had been through it twice before at that point. And I did a lot of preparing ahead of that delivery as far as breathing exercises, calming, grounding exercises, just mentally. And I think the breath, the breathing is a huge and very helpful thing, just to try not to let that pain that's often so visceral in labor really take over and kind of overtake you. And so I do remember it was probably too just knowing that there are going to be extra people here in this delivery room with me. And I don't want to be screaming and freaking everybody out. I would ideally like for this to be as smooth of a labor and delivery experience for all of us, as possible. And thankfully that one went very well. And my epidural did work, but leading up to my epidural, the breathing, using the yoga ball to kind of bounce on and sit on, those were some things that were really helpful for me. And I knew too, in the midst of that most intense pain, it's temporary. So as long as I could get through it, there would be even a little bit of a break before the next one. I could just take it one step at a time. And I think with this fourth delivery, things did feel quite a bit more out of control, just because the labor was progressing very fast. And with the epidural not working, it felt a little chaotic, in that delivery room. I'm so thankful that my husband was there, just having someone to hold their hand, reminding me to breathe through it, that I was going to get through it, was really helpful. And I remember too, all the nurses and the hospital staff there cheering me on, encouraging me that I could get through it. And the intended mom and I held hands for a lot of that portion too, especially through pushing. That was something that we had talked about ahead of time, just to have that literal connection, as her baby was being born, so that we were, literally and figuratively in this together. I think all of those kind of pieces, those environmental pieces around really helped. But it was an experience.
Well, thank you for sharing. Yeah, absolutely. You have some great tips there. And I love the fact that you were practicing, like you mentioned how helpful the breathing was. But correct me if I'm wrong, and you practiced that whilst you're still pregnant?
I did. I did. There was something that I read, or maybe I saw a video about preparing for that pain management during labor and almost, practicing holding your breath and practicing that positive self talk. And so thinking that was something I thought a lot about, leading up to that delivery. And I do think it was really helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, great. So your postnatal recovery, fourth time round, talk us through any experience with the heaviness that you talked about with the prolapse symptoms?
There was a little bit of that. And one thing that I did better with this most recent recovery than with any of my previous recoveries is that I allowed myself to rest. I think you mentioned sometimes horizontal rest. I think that's something I've heard you mention. And that makes so much sense. It makes so much sense to just let your body kind of on its own, to have that time and that space to kind of go back to normal. And of course, that doesn't happen overnight. And I think with both of my own deliveries with my own kids, I did feel this just pressure on myself. I put it on myself to get right back in shape as quickly as I could. And as a surrogate with my first delivery, I didn't have a baby at home. And I felt, again, I was putting that pressure on myself. I need to get back in shape right away. I did not let myself rest enough. And so with this most recent recovery, that was my priority, lay down, let myself rest, walk, but don't run right away. Let yourself take that time. There's no rush, to get back into it. And I did not want to exacerbate any prolapse symptoms. So I didn't notice as significant of the, heaviness and some of the other prolapse symptoms that I had noticed the first time around. But the prolapse, of course, is still there. And I do still have some symptoms, but it's very manageable. Thankfully, it's nothing painful. I did get a referral after my postpartum checkup to see a urogynecologist here, and they did recommend pelvic floor physical therapy, which I have continued to do. And so I'm thankful for the resources and just the awareness that I have now. And that's something that I'm often sharing with other surrogates too, because most women who go on to become surrogates have had similarly very easy pregnancies and recoveries. And so maybe they haven't really thought much about their pelvic floor. So I'm always reminding them, force yourself to rest, in those early days and be mindful of pelvic floor symptoms and things like that. I think it's so important.
Yeah, great advice. So it's great that you've had the support of a pelvic physical therapist where you are. You've gotten yourself back into running. You've had the resources. Where has FitNest Mama, because as I've mentioned, I know you've been a member for a few years now. Where has that come into your recovery process?
I think that it's been a tool that I know is always available. And I appreciate the fact that not only in your Facebook group, you're often posting short little workouts, just reminders about pelvic floor health. And those are things that, again, might remind me to do some Kegels, to do some pelvic floor exercises. And I think too, just, even with the time difference, I know that with the different workouts that you have, I can access those at any time. It's just a nice tool to have that I know is available at any time. And I think it's been a great supplement to the physical therapy exercises that I've learned along the way.
Yeah, great to hear. Well, Kristy, thank you so much for sharing your amazing story about surrogacy and sharing your experiences. If anyone would like to be in contact with you, how's the best way for people to contact you?
Yes. So you can find me on Instagram. I am not a huge Instagram poster, but I'm on there, and my handle is run_with_. So there's the running. That's a big part of my life. And also, if anyone is interested too in learning more about surrogacy, The agency that I went through as a surrogate and now work for is called Conceive Abilities. And so that's the word conceive and the word abilities combined into one word. But there's a link that I can share with you, Kath, that would direct people to learn a little bit more there. And I'd definitely encourage any woman, who's had a healthy history of pregnancy and delivery to consider it if it's something that is on her heart. I think there are so many families that just need a little bit of help to bring their babies here.
Yeah, amazing. And we do have listeners all around the world, so I'll definitely put those links in the show notes. Thank you so much, Kristy. Appreciate the time today. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your amazing story. We'll see you soon.
Okay, thank you so much.
That's it, ladies. Before I sign off, remember my team and I will be putting together the show notes for this episode with all the links, including how to connect with Kristy at fitnessmama.com/podcast. Have a fabulous day, everyone, and I look forward to you joining me very soon for another episode of the Pregnancy, Birth and Recovery podcast. Thanks for listening to the FitNest Mama podcast, brought to you by the FitNest Mama freebies found at www.fitnessmama.com/free. So please take a few seconds to leave a review, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and be sure to take a screenshot of this podcast, upload it to your social media, and tag me at FitNest Mama so I can give you a shout out too. Until next time, remember, an active pregnancy, confident childbirth, and strong postnatal recovery is something that you deserve. Remember our disclaimer, materials and contents in this podcast are intended as general information only and shouldn't substitute any medical advice, diagnosis or treatment. I'll see you soon.